Good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be with you today. Almost. I am there virtually in order to share with you a few thoughts about ufology. So this intervention is done from Geneva, Switzerland, and I would have preferred to be there in Montreal, of course. And so today, the title of this conference is the Psychic Dimension of UFOs, or the Elephant in the Room. I'm going to talk about the psychic component of UFOs. I'm not going to talk about elephants, but later I promise that I'm going to tell you why I'm using this image of the elephant in the room. Alright, so as a preamble, I would like to thank Yann Vadnet and to the Garpin organization for having me as a speaker. Thank you for having included me in the scientific steering committee. So thank you, Yang, for your trust and for the organizing of this conference. First, I would like to say that for 70 years now, the civil society has been studying the UFO phenomenon, whether through individuals, through organizations. And I'd like to say that so far the results have been disappointing. Many answers are unanswered, and mainstream science is going forward. But what I'm referring to is fundamental science or neuroscience, and their discoveries and advances are only bringing new questions for us ufologists. So the list of questions is growing, and on the other hand, we don't have any certainty. So we are turning in circles, basically, and unfortunately, this is creating lots of frustrations. So then, I have to say that there are many factors that explain the fact that our research is not going forward. And there's one aspect that is of great interest for me. This is part of my reflections. This is the approach adopted by the ufology community regarding the UFO phenomenon. Yes, there is one specific approach which really characterizes the world ufology research. And this is where everybody agrees, basically. They agree on the approach regarding the study of ufology. And let's not be afraid of words. I'm going to say what it is. I qualify this as a somehow obsessive behavior. This obsessive behavior only focuses on the material aspects of that research, and this is why I refer to materialistic reductionism. Let me give you one example. We study ground marks, radar data, photographs, videos, implants, UFO artifacts, and so on and so forth. And so the only lens through which we study UFOs very often is through matter and through traces. This is not bad, but it's not sufficient. So I'll come back to this later. Now, if we take a step back in this regarding this materialistic approach, the fact that ufologists have preferred this approach is basically due to our history. Since the Renaissance, following the religion predominant vision, then there was science, and now this is through this science lens that we interpret reality since the Renaissance. Then there have been we've seen great scientific advances, so that now the materialistic science is the main focus of our study. I'm not saying that we should not study Marx. We do have to study the materialistic aspect of UFOs. I'm not going to deny that. However, I think that this approach is not sufficient. It is necessary, but not sufficient. Why? Well, it is insufficient because the tools used by modern science are not adequate to the study of UFOs. I'm not saying that the UFO phenomenon is not scientific, not at all. I'm just saying that the tools are inadequate. There's one main reason for that. You know this. The UFO phenomenon is not something under a controllable setting. These apparitions are sporadic, unpredictable, and uncontrollable. Ergo, these observations cannot be verified. They are not reproducible. And through regular science, we cannot really study these UFO phenomena. We cannot reproduce them. This is the basic lack of repeatability. So we have to study it indirectly. The word indirectly is very important. So we are forced to study that through recordings, through traces. This is the materialistic approach, as I've said, which was adopted in majority by the UFO community so far. Otherwise, now I would like to talk about a different approach. This is a different approach which aims at studying this phenomenon through witnesses. So let's talk about witnesses. A witness, this is the first thing we can say, and think that most ufologists are going to agree on this. They are at the origin of 90% of the material of ufology. What I say is that without witness, there's no UFO, basically. So the UFO activities, this is basically an investigation process of gathering, analyzing of evidence on the field. We have tended to forget this in the latest years. There's one reason, the emergence of the internet. Many ufologists are now called lounge chair ufologists, so to speak, meaning that their activity is to study ufology through the internet, to go to discussion forums and to devise theories. This is not real ufology. This is something else. And the second reason being that the UFO sightings are fewer now, at least a few categories of these sightings, such as the close encounters of the third kind and of the fourth kind. So there have been fewer sightings of UFO occupants. The testimonies of abductions are also fewer now, it seems, during the last few years. So there's less evidence and there's less material that we can work with. And so we have to look at historical cases. So these are basically new investigations on old historical cases. And so let's go back now to the witness focus. It's through the witness that we can access these phenomena through all their dimensions in their globality. So we want to go beyond the material component, and we want to include all of the different components of these phenomena. There are many of them. First, there is the material component, then the psychic component, the psychological component, and then the symbolic or metaphorical component of these phenomena. So there are at least three main components: material, psychic, and symbolic or metaphorical. All right? Now, these dimensions have been neglected, lately, or have been ignored due to the focus on materialism, on the prevailing materialism point of view. I think this is a huge mistake. Let's not be afraid of works. This is a huge mistake. This psychic or symbolic dimensions, according to me, can give us many informations about its phenomenon, their intention, and what are the impacts on all of us. Now, this psychic dimension of the phenomenon is this elephant in the room I was referring to, the elephant in the China store. And the English people use that expression to describe an obvious phenomenon that everybody sees, but that nobody wants to talk about it. This is the elephant in the room, or the elephant in the China store, if you like. Everybody sees the issue, the problem, but nobody wants to address it. Nobody has the courage to discuss it. there is some kind of awkward moment. This is why I have titled this presentation The Psychic Element of UFOs and the Elephant in the Room. So just imagine this elephant in the room. This might create some little havoc in the China store. Alright, now, so what has not been done sufficiently is to study indirectly this phenomenon by focusing excessively on material aspects, but we should focus on the witness. The idea is to put the witness at the center of the analysis, and rather than putting the phenomenon at the center of the analysis, something that we cannot really do because we cannot place it in the center of a lab. We cannot reproduce it. And so, we should rather look at the psychological impact of the witnesses. So you know me, possibly. For many years I have been interested in this phenomenon. I have myself been a witness of UFO sightings, and so I have been doing some investigations in my country, in Switzerland, but also in France, in Brazil also. And I have, following the steps of Bob Preck, I have been in touch with him when he was alive with us. And so I have been able to meet a few testimonies of close encounters, of abductions, and I was able also to discuss with many investigators that have different cultures, different approaches. And so this was done on different continents, and so I was able, as a psychologist, this is my training, I was able to appreciate the impact of these phenomena on witnesses. I will provide some examples later, but this is the impact. I'm not the only one to say this. Other ufologists as well have been studying, such as those that have been trained in psychiatry, psychology, or sociology. I'm thinking of Kenneth Freen, for instance. He was a psychology professor. Also Dr. John Mack and others as well. So it is possible to measure the impact on the witness. This can be measured on the beliefs of the world, values, and representations of the witness. So it's not something which is trivial, because the UFOs have some clear impacts rather on the behaviors and beliefs of the witnesses. So now the work of psychologists, if they have the right tools, is to understand how are done these impacts, which direction are they heading into, and then to observe, to measure, and to see how these impacts are occurring in reality. Now let's give one clear example. Any UFO experience can readily impact the vision of the world of a witness, and this new vision of the world can lead to a new behavior or a new relationship to society through concrete actions. For instance, I have met several witnesses that have changed their profession following a UFO sighting. They have drastically changed their lives. They became involved in humanitarian work. This might appear to be insignificant, but suddenly they have decided to turn into vegetarians or to work in different causes. So I think that these are the types of changes that might be individual, but that might also be collective. So my approach, it's different from the standard ufology materialistic approaches. This has been to analyze this impact. How does this impact occur, trying to determine the intentions of this phenomenon, and then to infer its origin. The basic idea is like if you have a police investigation, you observe the changes in terms of beliefs, values, these changes occurring in beliefs and values, and then this might lead you to the origin of this phenomena, which might be interested in these changes. And then we might be able to understand the intentions of this phenomenon and therefore maybe potentially its origin. So this is my approach. Basically, what I have been observing in ufology for many years is that we ufologists have tried to place all of these phenomena in little boxes, in little categories since the beginning of the civil investigations. There's a hierarchy, there are many categories, many little boxes. All of these sightings are placed into these little boxes, and then we study. That's how we study UFOs. We've been doing that for many years, at least 30 years. And now we've realized that these categories are somehow artificial, and this leads to a dead end. The problem is that there are basically no two identical sightings. There are many different sightings, different types of occupants, and if you consult thousands, hundreds or thousands of reportings regarding UFO sightings, well, I put you to challenge. Find 2 or 3 pictures of objects that are identical. There are some similar objects indeed, similar objects, but out of the hundreds or thousands of photographs that we have, identical objects are very few. So, if we take a historical step back, after 70 years, we have realized that this phenomenon adapts to the spirit of the time. In Germany, they call this the Zeitgeist, the spirit of the time, Zeitgeist in German. So this phenomenon also adapts to the society and to the technological era. It also adapts to the witness and to the technological advancement of the era of the time. So maybe you remember that in 1800, at the end of the 1800s, there were these airships that were flying over some parts of the United States. These airships were in advance compared to the technology of that time. And so at that time they were trying to fly. And so then there were these flying Seggers, and big cargo started to generalize at that time. And then there's been the flying triangles in the 80s. Now we can talk about the Hudson wave in 83, 84. This is when they wanted to test these flying devices in American air bases, whether it's the P-2 or the F-117, then the orbs. So this phenomenon comes in waves and seems to anticipate our technological advance. And this goes in accordance with our technological stage. Even though the UFOs seem to be well in advance of what we are able to do. So this phenomenon seems to be able of mimicry. It is endowed with undeniable formal plasticity, as I say. It is like a chameleon, and it adapts to our expectations, and our awareness, it seems. So if you understand that, you will understand that it's not very useful to only look at the forms of this phenomenon. We should rather study the invariants, which is the recurrent mechanisms of the phenomenon, which are the real signature of these phenomena. I can talk about the elusiveness. Now we talk about elusiveness of ostentation or of the causes of it. Now, elusiveness is the capacity to escape our investigations. We can never catch it. Or I suspect that if it allows to be catched, it agrees to be catched. Now, the ostentation aspect, well, it's not going to appear anywhere, or at any time it will appear in front of one witness. It wants to be seen. Yes, to share a message maybe to the witness, but it is elusive at the same time. It really wants to be seen, but not by everybody, by a few witnesses under certain contexts, and so it controls its sightings. Now I can refer, there is a book where I have been able to identify these invariants, and I also refer to the very good work of my colleague Ari Zerker. He has been presenting these invariants in a book. The title of the book is Apparition mondiale d'humanoïdes, humanoid world apparitions. So there you have a few references to go beyond the appearance of these phenomena, where we only want to put that in little boxes. There we try to understand the essence, the main characteristics of these phenomena in their interactions with us, humans. Now let's say a few words about the psychic dimensions of these phenomena. As I said before, there are three dimensions. The material dimension, which has been studied by everybody. There's a psychic dimension, and then there's the symbolic dimension. Now let's talk about the psychic dimension of UFOs. So when you speak to a witness, you observe often that there is a common denominator. Many of these witnesses will develop an environmental awareness, or maybe a new concern to the health of the planet, or a new relationship toward humans and animals. Some will change their profession, their work. They want to work in social aspects or in life sciences, for instance. Others will work in social causes, ecological causes, for instance. Others will turn into vegetarians, and so on and so forth. These are only examples, but these examples are very concrete for these witnesses. They are very tangible in their lives, and they have a real impact. What I've been able to observe as well, I'm not the only one, is the development of psychic skills. I'm referring to extrasensorial skills amongst these witnesses, such as precognition, the capacity to foresee the future, or telepathy, meaning being able to send information from mind to mind, or to receive information from mind to mind, telepathy. Also, we can observe the opposite. There are some witnesses that have psychic skills, latent or not. They seem that they are more easily in touch with this UFO phenomenon, and this is where we have the kitchen or the egg. Chicken or the egg, sorry. Which comes first? Is it the capacity, that the skill that leads to UFO observations, or is it the opposite? Is it the UFOs that lead to these psychic skills? But anyway, these witnesses become more aware, and this has been stressed by John Mack, for instance, is that these witnesses talk about an interconnection of the living, and they talk about the personal or collective responsibility towards our planet. So if you wish, they develop these ideas that we find in older traditions in the First Nations or in Oriental spiritualities. The fact that our reality means that we are all interconnected at a very deep level, and they talk about a matrix of the living beings. Knowing that we are all interconnected, well, there is the impact of what we are doing on a daily basis. This has an impact on the world and on the living. So I'd like to say that this type of awareness means that we should be more responsible, collectively speaking. Now, now I'm thinking about a case. Some will develop a sense of mission. What does that mean, a mission? Well, these witnesses, after a sighting or a close encounter, will take the initiative, and they will be working for the collective consciousness. For instance, they sometimes want to share the message that we are not alone in the universe, that we should take care of our planet. Now, I have one case in mind. For instance, it's the case of Tim Edward. Tim Edward, he is also dead now, just like Bob Pratt. Well, he was living in Soledad, Colorado, and this was on August 27, 1995. And it was a Sunday morning, I believe, and he was going on an outing with his daughter, his son, and his spouse. And then his daughter suddenly says, "Hey, Daddy, there's something up in the sky." And so, yes, up there was a flying cigar. And so he took his video camera and he was able to make a footage of about 7 minutes of this huge flying cigar, which has been observed by some other 20 witnesses. So this has been heard in the local media, and so he called the sheriff, and the sheriff and then he also participated in some TV shows. So what's interesting is that even though the footage is interesting, it's not only that, it's all of the impact of this phenomenon on his own vision of the world, on his person. So I was able to talk with him after his sighting, and basically he told me that the UFOs are monitoring our planet. They are concerned that we should stop using nuclear energy, and he said, "I feel like I have some guidance and that I'm like a messenger." So again, he had this idea of having a mission in life. All right, now that's one first case. This is one case amongst many other cases. There's another well-known case which is quite spectacular. This is the case that happened in Rua in Zimbabwe. This is where we find the Ariel school, located 1 kilometer away from the capital of the country, Harare. So this case happened in the same period of time on September 6, 1994, and we are in a situation where the children were playing in the schoolyard when the teachers were in a council. So there are about 60 of these children, I think 62. They were playing outside in the schoolyard, and suddenly there's a flying saucer that lands near the schoolyard, and out from this UFO come out some humanoids. The children are going to observe this flying saucer, and there are 2 ETs described by these children that come out. So many things happen, and the local psychologists were called to support the children, and then John Mack was able to travel there in order to talk with these children. We have to know that John Mack is a psychiatrist, a famous psychiatrist from Harvard. I think he is the one that created the chair in psychiatry in Harvard. So he was able to distinguish what's delusional from something that is based on reality. So he was able to see if they were lying or not, these children. So it's difficult to see how a whole group of 62 children could lie all of a sudden. So basically what happened is that these UFO occupants sent a telepathical message to children. And so one student, I'm going to show you some excerpts of this. So this student was saying, quote unquote, "These UFOs are talking to us. They say that the end of the world is near. We are destroying the planet." And this student was saying the ET was not talking with his mouth. He was talking to me through his eyes. So these school children were troubled, unsettled. So this children was terrified, and she said, quote unquote, "It's like all the trees were dying, we didn't have air to breathe, and we could all die." Alright, so I could show you a little video excerpt. There's a documentary which is going to be completed soon. Some of these school children have been found back 20 years after, and the main idea of this film crew is to see how this observation has impacted the lives of these witnesses that were children at that time. And you will see in this short excerpt that the emotion is very strong, as if this event occurred yesterday. And so this documentary is not yet available, but should be soon in the next few months.
Somehow there was a message about pollution from the way he was staring?
All the trees will just go down and there will be no air and people will be dying.
I mean, you just felt nobody really cared. Who do you talk to? How do you understand it? It was just really hard.
Something that a good friend of mine told me, and that really stuck with me, is the aliens projected an image into his head.
So I've talked about ecology. Now I'm going to talk about the nuclear energy. I think it's connected, as you know. So there's something that I saw, is that the ecology will become a mantra for these witnesses, for these contactees very often. So there is a category of witnesses. There are the contactees. This is referred to these contactees of the 50s, of the 60s. Then there are the abductees from the 70s up to the years 2000. So this has become like a mantra for all of these people, witnesses, contactees, and abductees. Just remember, in the 50s, contactees said that we had to get rid of the nuclear energy. Now, if you go back and read the speeches of these contactees, you will find that this is basically their mantra. And then in the 80s, it was the abductees, which are talking about apocalyptic events, ecological events in relation to nuclear energy. Either this would be shown to them on screens, catastrophes, either these ideas were implanted directly into their minds. So it's always the same warning about nuclear energy that we find. What's interesting is that, in fact, well, this danger, well, we know that nuclear and civil, military and civil nuclear issues are not settled yet. Since Fukushima, we know clearly, we can see that the nuclear is like a Damocles sword hanging over all of us. And there's a book that will be published soon about the Chernobyl nuclear plant catastrophe of 1986. And this book, is called OVNI Nucléaire. This is the title. It was written by Daniel Aran. He is a physicist, and he is very well positioned to explain that without the intervention of the UFOs, Europe would have faced most probably a nuclear explosion without the intervention of these UFOs. So I recommend the reading of that book, which is a compilation of the major UFO interventions on top of nuclear plants, silos, nuclear facilities around the world. The title is OVNI Nucléaire. On top of the nuclear file, well, we can be concerned of the state of our planet. And you know this, I'm sure, but just a few months ago, more than 200 famous personalities in France raised the alarm. The committee was basically saying that because of global warming, the lack of the reduction of living spaces, problems with biodiversity, air pollution, water pollution, deforestation, and all of these indicators are endangered. And so in a few decades, there will be big problems if we don't do anything about it. So for 70 years, we can see that the witnesses have been saying this. And the nuclear problem is a problem for our humanity. So we can see that both UFOs and the nuclear files are connected. And this is what the witnesses say and feel following a sighting with UFOs. So all of this is in lockstep with what we can also observe today about the environmental world problems. and it seems that the politicians are not able to address these problems. So what's interesting is that this ecological message from witnesses has been validated by many other data, UFO phenomena, but also by what we are seeing in the world. And so there's a connection there. And we cannot ignore the fact that UFOs have been intervening on top of civil or military nuclear facilities, and some of these UFOs have deactivated some intercontinental missiles. I was able to speak myself with Robert Salas. He was a direct testimony of these UFO interventions. Also, I was in touch with a French military that was working in the Albion Plateau in France. This military person is called Michel Forest. So the proofs of the relationships between UFOs and nuclear facilities are there. There is an official recognition of that, by the way, whether it's the directors of projects such as Luis Elizondo, Jean-Jacques Velasco in France, or the GEPAN organizations. So you might remember recently Luis Elizondo, who was working for the Defense Department. This was a program over 5 years, including millions of dollars or euros. The objective was to assess the level of threat by UFOs on nuclear facilities, on the military capacities of the American government. And Mr. Luis Elizondo said it many times. There is a direct correlation between UFOs and nuclear energy. As far as Jean-Jacques Velasco is concerned, he was in charge for many years of the CEPRAC and of GEPAN in France. This is the official organization of research on UFOs by the French government. So again, the conclusion is the same. UFOs and the nuclear file are directly connected. They have presented even some stats on this topic, and he is the co-author of a book that shows the direct link between UFOs and nuclear installations, facilities. I could also talk about the UFO wave over nuclear plants. In 2014, there is a director of a nuclear facility. His name is Pascal Pezziani. He's also made a public declaration on the media saying that it was a UFO that was flying on top of his nuclear plant. And he's also made a direct connection between UFOs and nuclear facilities in 2014. And I have also been doing my own analysis. This has shown that at that time of the nuclear tests, between 1945 and 1990, there were these UFO waves which are in direct temporal and geographical correlation with these nuclear sites, whether it's nuclear plants or nuclear storage, nuclear missiles. And this is connected to these waves of UFOs. There is a direct correlation. Then between 66 and 67 in the US, this would also correspond to the greatest numbered or stored nuclear warheads. They would see the appearance of UFOs on top of nuclear storage areas. Same thing for these nuclear testings. The bigger the energy, the more the number of UFO apparitions, sightings. So very quickly, the government at the end of the 40s and 70s has been able to connect these UFO sightings with atomic testings. And they understood around the year 1952 by observing that these UFO waves were going from the west to the west. So these atomic testings were generating these UFO apparitions, so that in 1957 they were able to measure and observe and study the UFO phenomenon on the world stage, because prior to the International Geophysical Year, they had provoked a series of atomic testings which were very important. This was in the month of May or June 1957, and then they were able to observe these UFO sightings all around the world. This was a world wave in 1957, United States, Russia, Japan, and other countries as well. So the government, the American government, knows that this is occurring. They have made a connection between UFOs and nuclear events, and they know that these nuclear events are attracting these UFOs apparitions. I could talk about this for hours. This is not the real topic of my intervention here. I would simply like to mention that the ecological message from witnesses, this is something which is as tangible as the physical evidence. All of this is connected. UFOs, nuclear events, and psychic messages from witnesses. So in a nutshell, there is this materialistic approach, and as I've said, this is something which is necessary. Unfortunately, it is not sufficient. This is an incomplete approach. It focuses on the shape and not on the content, on the core of the issue. Now, whether the UFO is squared, rounded, or rectangular, we have to dig deeper. We have to see what's the impact. So I consider that the UFOs are like messengers, messengers of change. And UFOs will break all of the barriers: subjective, objective, material, non-material, organic, non-organic, material, psychic. So the UFO phenomenon is all of this at once, and it teaches that our reality is much bigger than what the materialistic science would teach us. And in order to recognize this, the reason why the UFO phenomenon is still a taboo subject is because we are still keeping all of these little boxes, and we don't want to question our assumptions. We are not ready to question the nature of our reality. So the UFO phenomenon is also the perfect opportunity to do science, just like Jacques Vallée said, in a different manner, because this is a challenge. We have to meet the challenge, and to meet this challenge we need courage. It seems that there is a lack of courage right now. This phenomenon also shares a message. It's like a meta-communication. It often goes through awareness and a symbolic message. This is an ecological message very often. And so if we analyze the form and the shape and where these impacts are heading into, we might be able to determine the intentions of these phenomena, and then we might find its origin. All right, so this is just part of the equation. Now it's up to you to complete this equation and to find your own conclusions. Thank you so much for your attention. I wish you a great continuation at this symposium. I know that you are in good company, and goodbye from Switzerland. Have a nice day in Canada. Thank you so much for your attention once again. Goodbye.